Welcome to the 2021 Sunstone Symposium Session 133, Natasha Helfer and the AASECT LDS Therapist Panel. At Sunstone, we are making it a goal to build a community that allows many ways for people to express their faith. Our tagline is, "There's more than one way to Mormon." We invite you to help us build a community where all paths are given space to be better understood. Please support us in our mission by making a donation and subscribing at sunstone.org. After the symposium, Sunstone staff will edit, polish, and upload all of this year's session videos to the Whova app. It will take about 2 weeks for everything to be available, but once it is, every video will be available to watch and rewatch on the Whova app through the end of 2021. Please type any questions for the session into the Whova app to be addressed during the Q&A at the end. About this presentation, Natasha Helfer and AASECT LDS Therapist Panel. I'm going to introduce you to our speakers before we begin. Natasha Helfer received her bachelor's degree in psychology from Brigham Young University and her master's degree in marriage and family therapy from Friends University. She also received her certifications as a sex therapist and sex therapist supervisor from the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. Helfer is a speaker, writer, and podcaster with 21 years of clinical experience, primarily working with a Mormon clientele around issues of relational health, faith transitions, and journeys and sexuality. She writes a blog called The Mormon Therapist and hosts podcast Mormon Mental Health and Mormon Sex Info. Helfer has authored 2 books, One Family, 2 Views, Mixed Faith Marriage, and Check Your Baggage, Challenge Sex Negative Messages. Helfer was recently excommunicated from the Mormon Church for issues surrounding her advocacy for sexual health. Kristin Bennion is a licensed mental health therapist and an AASECT certified sex therapist. With over 12 years of experience, she is the owner of Intimate Connections Counseling and works primarily with clients experiencing difficulties related to sexuality, relationships, spirituality, and religion. Kristin, is currently working towards a doctoral degree in sexuality studies, where she is studying the intersections of gender, sexuality, and the media. Paige Vandersloot is a licensed marriage and family therapist and an AASECT certified sex therapist. She is a trained certified EMDR trauma therapist. She sees individuals and couples at her private practice, Awaken Center for Healing in Alpine, Utah. She helps many couples who are navigating differences in their beliefs and preferences related to their sexuality. Paige works with a diverse clientele, those deeply religious and also those who have transitioned and are transitioning out of religion. Paige is a dedicated student. I'm not going to say that word right. I'm so sorry, you guys. Is it a K? I'm sorry. Can you pronounce that for me? I'm sorry, Paige.
Qigong,
a form of martial arts and energy healing. She is currently in the middle of a doctorate program in Chinese energy medicine. Dr. Stephanie Bueller is a licensed psychologist in AASECT, certified sex therapist and supervisor. She is the director of the Bueller Institute and creator of LearnSexTherapy.com, which provides continuing education in sex and relationship therapy for psychotherapists and wellness providers. Dr. Bueller is the author of a best-selling textbook, What Every Mental Health Professional Needs to Know About Sex, 3rd edition in press, and Counseling Couples Before, During, and After Pregnancy, Sex and Relationship Issues. In-demand speaker, she frequently is quoted in the media, recently in The Atlantic, Men's Health, and Business Insider. You can learn more online at www.learnsextherapy.com. I will now turn the time over to the presenters.
Thank you so much, Anne, for that introduction, and we all appreciate it. And we're kind of like a badass group of women. Hearing all of that. Anyway, so I just wanted to start off by telling everyone a little bit that I thought going through this whole process of my disciplinary counsel and having it being so directly tied to my profession and my professional standards and ethics as to the reasons why I was being called in, it has made it a really interesting intersection between my own kind of personal story and then the story of clinicians at large. And so I thought it would be interesting to have some other people give their responses in regards to what happened and kind of what it implied for them, and how they make sense of it kind of in their own general practice and also their own personal spirituality. So I invited Paige Vandersloot to be part of this. One, because she was my first supervisee when I was training to be a sex therapist supervisor. So I thought it'd be important to have somebody who has direct experience working with me and how I work. And so I thought she'd be a valuable voice. I brought Kristin Bennion on because she has been like a colleague of mine since the very beginning. We were both kind of becoming sex therapists in a similar time frame, and we've just really enjoyed each other's company. Both Paige and Kristin come from kind of Mormon culture backgrounds themselves, and so understand a lot of the cultural competency. And then I thought it'd be really interesting to have a non-Mormon join us. So I invited my mentor and colleague, Dr. Stephanie Buehler, to come and give us a non-Mormon perspective as she watched all of this happening. Stephanie and I go back. She was my supervisor when I was going through training through AASECT. We are all AASECT certified sex therapists. And I just thought it'd be interesting to have that kind of a perspective. I do want to just talk briefly before I turn the time over to Paige, that, you know, AASECT sex therapy certification is a pretty big deal. I think sometimes, and what I noticed in this whole dialogue of what was happening with me, is that there were a lot of mental health professionals that had a lot of opinions. And there are great mental health professionals out there that are not necessarily trained in sexuality, right? And so, and it's not a very common thing to have somebody that's trained specifically in the kind of the niche of sexual health and sexual issues that have to do with all of us. So the CST that we all carry behind our names represents at least 18 months, usually about 2 to 3 years of training that carries many, many hours, both educationally and also many hours that we ourselves have to be supervised under another supervised person to be able to do the work that we do. So it has been a bit frustrating to me when my opinions or my expertise is put kind of at the same level as another mental health professional's expertise that doesn't carry the same credentials, right? So it's like if you're talking to, I don't know, a dermatologist about something that's happening with your heart, you know, it's like the heart surgeon is like, wait a minute, I think you should be talking to me. So that's been a little bit about how I've been feeling as there have been a lot of opinions going around. But without any further ado, I'm going to give each of these lovely people a chance to talk a little bit about their response and their thoughts as they witnessed this thing that was happening in Mormon land. Paige.
Okay. So I guess from an emotional perspective or just a personal perspective, when I first learned what was happening, I was really disheartened and so sad. I think that was my initial reaction. I just was like, I can't believe this is happening. I think I just wanted to come to you, Natasha, just because I have worked with you. I've consulted with you on so many cases regarding LDS couples and individuals and their sexuality, and know like the heart that you have, and know just how much you do value each person's autonomy and their spiritual beliefs, and want to help with their mental health and combating shame. And so I feel the same way. So I kind of also, like, I felt like what was happening to you almost was like happening to me in some way. And so there was just a lot of sadness and also like frustration and anger, I think, because I think the official excommunication letter said it had nothing to do with your professional life, but the letter sent to you previously, the one that the therapist letter that we signed, was very much concerned with the professional opinions that you've been advocating. And so I felt like that was misleading and sending mixed messages, and it just leaves a feeling of professionals who want to stay in their LDS faith and unsure of want to stay in their LDS faith, but also, want to advocate for what their knowledge is, what they learned professionally just from being with people, and also all the education that they received, unsure of what's okay to say, what's okay not to say. And and I had different colleagues kind of reach out to me knowing that I was AASECT certified, and asked me how I feel and just kind of their feelings about it. And it's kind of, it's not a good setting, it's not setting a good precedent to be putting a muzzle essentially on LDS professionals by virtue of the threat of church discipline, who publicly advocate mental health best practices that are at odds, could be at odds with official church positions or doctrines. And so it's tricky. I think now any LDS therapist who supports gay marriage or masturbation is going to be worried that endorsing those things, at least publicly, could cost them, their church membership. And even though it's exactly in line with mental health best practices, I think, and the idea of, as I've evolved in my professional life, I used to be just very, and I still, I'm pretty quiet. Like I work with my clients, and I don't like a big, huge public presence. And I think though that at some point, when I'm getting to the point also that as you see situation after situation after situation, there is this need to speak and to advocate more. And Natasha has done that. And I think Brene Brown, she talks about how, shame exists in the culture where there's secrecy and silence and judgment. And so it's important to be able to publicly speak, because collectively, when an alternative point of view is presented, it allows the shame collectively to kind of dissipate. People have to struggle, but there can be with maybe their religious beliefs and what they hold dear, and what science says, what their experience says, and they kind of have to wrestle with that. And we can do that in a collective way publicly. I think it's important to have that public discourse. And so there needs to be room in the church for members and therapists to publicly discuss the things about the church that they'd like to see improve, or things that they don't believe. And a nourishing spiritual environment shouldn't feel like an authoritarian regime that will stamp you out if you disagree. And so I guess this was an opportunity for me. I don't usually publicly speak, but in any forum, because it's not my thing. But I felt like, because of who I know Natasha is, and because it's so personal, it's kind of one of those things, like, you have to do what is right and let the consequence follow. And I have, want to follow with my professional integrity and speaking out. And so that's kind of some of the thoughts that I've had. So
I really appreciate that. I'm sure you and Kristin and I could break out in song singing, do what is right, let the
Right.
consequence fall. Kathy's probably like, oh, that sounds interesting. I do want to just clarify for the audience just what I was disciplined for. So the letter that you mentioned that I received, so it was my support for normalizing masturbation as a kind of a normal developmental part of being a human. It was about supporting gay marriage. It was about my stances on pornography, that I've, maybe normalize the viewing of pornography from the perspective that it's not considered an addiction, and at the same time taking a values approach of people don't want pornography viewing as part of their value system or lifestyle together, which is fine. And then third or fourth was kind of just using Mormon as part of my materials and my branding, because I'm primarily working within the Mormon LDS population in my entire career. So those were the four things that were in the initial letter of concern. And then you're correct that they said that the reasons why I was excommunicated had nothing to do with my professional opinions, and I agree with you. I think that's a complete kind of gaslighting comment, because I don't know how that they all have to do with my profession. So anyway, okay, Kristin, let's turn the time over to you.
Well, I was really, Natasha, so glad to get invited to this, because I hadn't really sat with my own feelings about everything. I just knew I was feeling a lot of things. And personally, for me, watching it from, whatever venues we all had the luxury to watch it all go down, it was very painful for me. Not only are you a dear colleague, you're a dear friend to me. And so to see someone be put through a process that frankly just looked just really gross and I want to say disenfranchising, but yeah, like just very not treated as a full human, like just with less rights and less dignity than you deserved. And that was just extremely painful to watch. It harkened to me to the time of the November 2015 exclusion policy. It's like, the institution roared its head is kind of just what it felt like. And what do they say? It was shocking, but not surprising. It was just very hard for me to watch on a personal level. I deeply wish I could have been there. Like that was, I just felt like called. I wish I could have been there to show solidarity to my dear friend who, I think I speak for most, I'll speak for me for sure, but you're a trailblazer with ethics and writing that, the fine line between cultural norms and professional ethics, and fighting for those that we love to work with and those that we love. And so, yeah, I was deeply saddened and disgusted by some of the process. It was just really, really sad for me. I think it showed how much the church is unwilling or ill-equipped to grapple with dissent or different viewpoints that are threatening. And that was again hard to see reinforced through the whole process. Professionally, for me, I'm concerned, was then and still continue to be, for some of our clients that we work with who might then think that those with the letters after our names, like AASECT, certified sex therapists or whatnot, are not condoned to work with by the church, or might feel that they can't get the treatment they were looking for, or that they can't trust our, research-based, evidence-based, clinically sound opinions on really powerful concepts in their life. And so that's pretty scary to me. I know I don't know about you all, but I had some, Paige, I don't know about you, but I had some people asking, but I was nervous that that my practice could be impacted, or my professional reputation could be impacted. And so that was jarring. It was not at all my top priority, but it was asked that by multiple people. And so that was very, disconcerting, I think. But yeah, I don't know. I'm just kind of rambling.
No, I think that's a really interesting point, is that because I had thought about, in psychology in general and mental health in general, but you're right. It's like those of us, and there's not many of us within the LDS community that have gone through this specified training to become certified sex therapists. There's probably about a dozen of us, maybe. But yeah, if this happens to me and this is like incorrect treatment to go receive, then what does that mean for all the CSTs, within our community? So that is very sobering, and it is our our livelihood, and it definitely can have a chilling effect on something that we depend on and our families depend on. So there's a lot of intersection there, professionally and personally, just from a financial aspect too.
Yes.
Sure. Thank you, Kristin. All right, Stephanie.
Oh, gosh. I have a connection with all three of you. And I feel, Natasha is she's very dear to me. So a lot of emotion is coming up right now. It was just personally, it was painful to watch what was unfolding, truly painful. And really from an outsider standpoint, unbelievable. It isn't the first time that I've been made aware of somebody being excommunicated, that sometimes people are excommunicated, they speak about their experience, but to, I guess, have a front row seat to it and see it from the kind of get a different view of what that is like. It was horrifying, frankly, to see somebody treated so poorly. And it seemed to me like there was a lot of purposeful humiliation that was happening that did not need to occur. Like it didn't, to me, it's such a shaming process. So, I mean, I can understand an organization has a right to govern itself, especially a religion. But to me, a religion, and maybe I'm naive here, but religion is about helping us learn to love and respect each other. And there was nothing loving or respectful about what I saw. So that was very difficult to witness. And then professionally, because I was Natasha's supervisor, as she came into this profession of sex therapy, I was, I'm familiar with her work and, like well aware of the kind of internal machinations, struggles, discussions that we had together about how to balance out her ethical obligation to her clients to provide evidence-based scientific care to her clients and balance that with the, of course, my landline is going off.
Call from,
Sorry. Balance that with, her faith and the faith of her clients as well, because, it doesn't matter what faith you belong to. I think we all practice our faiths in different ways. And, some people are very orthodox in their beliefs and other people have more of a cafeteria style and, pick and choose what works for them. Every person who comes into came into Natasha's practice, she had to think about, who is this person in front of me? What are their beliefs? What do I know as a therapist? What skills do I bring? How can I work with this person in a way that is respectful of their faith and yet also delivers to them the science that we have gleaned from, sexology is a fairly new profession, but from the last, 75 years of research that she would have access to. So, and I mean, that those were very deep, very thoughtful discussions. Very, it reflected to me somebody really at the top of her professional game. So to see this happening, it was like, oh my God, they don't get mental health. They don't understand what we are required to do, what our license requires us to do, what our training requires us to do. And that, we have to balance, create some balance there. And that's not easy. And I think it, to me, just again, speaking as a layperson, I mean, it seemed like a missed opportunity. It seemed like a missed opportunity. It seemed like it was a time for elders and mental health providers, whether they're sex therapists or working in some other area, specialty area, a time to come together and talk about the need to balance one's own beliefs, the client's beliefs, the church beliefs, and the science. And how does one do that? And to me, that was kind of a shame. I'm fearful for members, for LDS members, Mormon members, members who are also sexual and gender minorities. And, the idea that an advocate has been excommunicated and can no longer do that work within any of that work within the church to try to make changes. Maybe those changes are going to take 100 years. I don't know, right? It might be like incrementally slow. But I think because we know that there is a great deal of harm that is being done within many religious and cultural institutions and school institutions to sexual and gender minority people. We know that they have a much higher rate of anxiety, depression, suicide attempts, and completed suicides. And it worries me. I think, well, who's there advocating for them now? And I'm also, finally, I'm fearful about clients seeing therapists who don't have appropriate training in treating sexual concerns because maybe they've heard things about AASECT, negative things. They worry perhaps that they are going to come under certain kind of scrutiny, for going to somebody who advocates for them. And again, it just seemed a missed opportunity. And I would say, just going back to the first issue, I mean, if this is the kind of treatment that somebody who's, a sex therapist is kind of a horse of a different color, where we have kind of a unique profession. It requires kind of a unique personality to want to, do this work, and it's wonderful work. But I think, I think all of, I'm speaking for all of us. I think in many ways we're just very mainstream. We're just, and to see someone who's mainstream get that kind of treatment, and made me fearful for people who are not so mainstream. How are they viewed? How are they shamed? How are they harmed? Well, it's very difficult things to think about. So.
Yes, thank you. Not to put you on the spot, but you would probably do a better job than I would at just explaining a little bit more in detail all of the types of things that go into the CST accreditation process, because you run an institute where you accredit people, you help people get that accreditation.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot. It's definitely a lot. You have to be passionate, but it requires 150 hours of education. That is post-master's degree, postdoctorate education. That's no small thing. It requires that you have 50 hours of supervision with someone who has been, is already certified for at least a couple of years, who can oversee your work and make sure that you're working ethically and therapeutically with the people coming into your practice. You have to show that you've carried on 300 hours of clinical work. You have to attend a workshop called a SAR, which is an experiential workshop where you have to check in with your biases about sexuality and sexual behavior. And, it's no small accomplishment. And I think, I think most people don't really understand. I know most people don't understand what it takes to do this particular kind of work. It's not just putting out a shingle and saying, I do sex therapy. I mean, you can, there's no law saying, but if you're going to do it in a way that's ethical, and effective, then getting this training is important.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'd like to open it up just a little bit of, to discussion between us. But one of the things that I struggled with, and I'm sure we all struggle with throughout my career, and I think Paige kind of talked about this a little bit in her presentation, is how public should we be as therapists, right? And what's the line between kind of the therapy room and having kind of a blank slate, right? The less people know about you, the less they can infer about you, right? When they come to see you in a space of therapy. And yet, we are working within populations, like Stephanie said, a lot of minority populations. We're seeing kind of the effects of both cultural and religious and political shame in particular, and discrimination. And so in a sense, that's what led me to speak out about things. I remember feeling very trepidatious about my first blog post, where I was writing things that I knew would not necessarily align with how the church teaches certain aspects. And it happened to be about masturbation, was kind of when I first crossed those lines. And I remember the first time I wrote about my support of gay marriage, and how that was also a moment of feeling uncomfortable. Gay marriage was not legal in the United States when I wrote about that. And it was a bigger conversation than even the Mormon church at the time, but I felt very strongly about that from my own ethics and my professional point of view and my own spirituality. So, I don't know, what are your thoughts? I'll just kind of open it up as far as how you've dealt with some of those, concerns, or maybe you have your own opinions about how much advocacy work we should or shouldn't be doing as therapists.
I'll say just really quick, for me, it's something I'm constantly grappling with. And I don't know if it's because I completed my licensure work. I feel like at the end of where it was still like, you're a blank slate, like you were just saying, Natasha, and then there are good reasons to be, just completely there for the client, so that they're not feeling like they're taking care of your feelings or your thing, there are just lots of reasons why. but it feels like I completed my licensure, I don't know, too many years ago. And then social media just bam, and it's things are shifting drastically in the intersection between mental health workers and public advocates and influencers. And like, it's just something that I'm constantly grappling with my little online presence, you know. But, you know, I think about my clients and thinking, you know, what will they think, you know, how will this affect them? Reading that I may have quite a strong opinion about such and such, you know, versus just maintaining that blank slate. And so I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm just saying it's constantly on my mind, but I do believe that we're swinging toward we're ethically bound in some ways to speak up too. Like, how do we not, when things that we know so intimately are causing such deep harm to people who we care a lot about. And so
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to say, as the non-Mormon member, you know, even for me, you know, like how far to go with my beliefs, because you know, I might turn somebody off, but I at a certain point, maybe early on in my private practice, I decided I didn't care, you know, because the need to advocate is stronger than the need to attract clients or to care what certain people thought about me. And I'm in Orange County, California. It's very conservative here. I am not conservative. I don't put my political views on my website, but I think you can kind of figure it out from the things that I say. And I'm fine with that. You know, everybody is welcome. I don't care, you know, what your beliefs are if you're coming in for mental health issues. But I think it gives the public, everybody in the public, an opportunity to think about why a mental health professional might be saying something, whether it's on their website or on their blog, in the media. You know, I think I agree with Kristin, you know, like we have, I think, a growing obligation to be public about our beliefs and what we see. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I grapple with this constantly. I think it's hard, like in the like, even politically, it just seems like there's just more polarization. And so the more, sometimes I wonder if I stand out strong in something, like what about sometimes I wonder, is, you know, should I try to be in this more of the blank slate? I don't know if it's the blank slate or more nuanced or more neutral, to help facilitate a more conversation, because sometimes people are really sensitive to a strong position. And I also try to like have a beginner's mind too, like what are my blind spots still? I know a lot and I've had a lot of education and I'm still learning. And so it's like, you want to have the confidence to like make a stand, and also the professional humility and whatever spiritual humility that I can be wrong, or I might be not seeing something still. And so so that's also kind of what I kind of go back and forth on, like, you know, how do I want to present myself? And I kind of like the idea of like us all coming together at the dining room table and like being able to like really talk about things, not wanting to alienate. But at the same time, if you don't take a stand, then you are sometimes furthering the abuse of the sexual minorities or the trauma there too. So it's hard.
Yeah, it's really hard, and it's interesting, as Stephanie was reminding me about all the cases I brought to her as I was training to be a sex therapist, that it was really a lot about that. It was a lot about like, so if because it's not even public, quite frankly. I mean, I don't have to be public for somebody who's been in my office to, and this has happened to me actually too, where, you know, I gave maybe some advice to a couple who was divorcing, I believe, and they were fairly young. And I was kind of like asking them, well, how are you going to manage your sexual life post-divorce, since, you know, you've already become sexually active, and what are your thoughts about that? And so as they left my office, I got a call several weeks later, you know, from a very upset bishop about some of the things that we had talked about in that session, because they went and shared with him some of the things we had discussed, like whether or not masturbation would be, you know, involved in that post-sexual life, or how they would date, or things of that nature. So these things can happen word of mouth too, right? Just whatever you're saying in your office may or may not be shared outside of your office, even if you don't have a blog and you don't have social media and et cetera. But I remember that super hard place of, like, on the one hand, like Dr. Bueller is saying, kind of, you know, I don't have to care, you just show up, and if I'm a good fit, we'll be a good fit for each other. On the other hand, feeling that responsibility, I think, like Paige is talking about, of you know, meeting people where they're at, trying to see if there's room, and again, being like really worried that if they don't see people like us, they are going to see professionals that I think have been very unethical and have actually espoused things that now are illegal in certain states, like conversion therapy, right? Or sex addiction treatment centers for people who have no business, you know, taking out a second mortgage on their home to pay for a sex addiction treatment center that has no efficacy or science backing it up, you know? And so, oh, it's just so, like, it is like, it makes my brain hurt, right? So I have to get you to trust me enough, because I want to protect you from going to the untrustworthy spaces. But at the same time, I also know you're not going to trust me, because I'm saying things that make us all uncomfortable, because we don't know how to talk about sex really at all in at least this Mormon community. So I don't know what your responses are to all that. Maybe I'm just, like Kristin said, just shooting the wind too.
I just like how you named the two tensions that I was trying to name at first, you know, that.
Yeah, it's really, it's really hard. And it's been interesting too, like, to have so many people ask me, well, why do you want to be part of such an unhealthy organization, right? Or why do you care that they kicked you out? Didn't you want to leave anyway? Or, you know, things of that nature. And I think that, I mean, there's personal things that still matter to me very much so, but again, from this professional space, who do you want to help? You know, when you go and learn something, you know, when you go to medical school, or when you go to become a lawyer, or, you know, whatever skills you have, a lot of times you want to bring it back to your community, right? You want to help the people that you know could really use and utilize those skills. So that was also a question that I thought was interesting, that I should just be like, I mean, in a way, I kind of make it like the United States. Why aren't we all just leaving the United States, right? It's all messed up. There's a lot of corruption. There's a lot of, you know, problems. But don't we love our country, right? Don't we serve within our country? Don't we want to make our country better? You know, many of us do that in lots of different ways, from running for office to working within our local school boards, you know, I mean, anyway, yeah.
But I think that's, I think you know, it's me, you know, I think sometimes being able to work from inside an organization is necessary, you know, like sometimes organizations need to be carried forward or change, even if they're kicking and screaming, and, you know, it's like a family, you know, change back. No, don't change. We want to stay the same. It's like, you can't change it. You can't stay the same. Everything everything is in flux. And like, how are you going to evolve? Right? Or are you just going to devolve, which is what we're seeing in a lot of religion. I mean, people are leaving religion in droves, you know, because it doesn't serve them, doesn't serve today's people. And that doesn't mean that people don't have any spiritual beliefs, because we know there's a huge population of people who identify as spiritual but not religious, and they can't find an appropriate spiritual home. And you know, that to me is a shame. You know, like I said, there's opportunity there. There's opportunity, even if there is just space to listen, and they really cut off any opportunity to listen to you. They were afraid, I think. From the outside looking in, they looked very afraid to hear what you had to say. Mm-hmm.
In your 1 hour allotted.
Yeah.
For you.
Yeah, really half an hour, because half an hour was going to be for my witnesses. So yeah, I was ready to talk for half an hour.
Yeah.
After 150 hours of education.
Yes, right. Mm-hmm. You know,
Right.
They didn't understand. They really didn't understand the issue. They was just very threatened, you know, and that's what we're seeing. I mean, it's like a microcosm of the macrocosm of what we're seeing everywhere, is that, you know, there's a patriarchal, you know, like structure that's really trying to hold on to those old ways, and they're not working.
Yeah.
They're not working. So
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, before we take questions, oh, Paige, were you going to say something? Go ahead,
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think, you know, the church, in the way that they handled this situation, and then the way that they are handling it, like, really does them a disservice, because I mean, I know personally, I had clients that would listen to your podcast and then and read what you wrote, the blogs, and it was helping them find a way to stay, to like be able to wrestle, because they had these strong spiritual and religious beliefs, but they also in their personal life think certain things were not working for them in a way. They weren't fitting into that box. And, you know, having professionals that are still in and that are like making space for other ways of you know, living your religion potentially, or making sense of it for you, is healthy for the whole, right? Like it makes it easier for people to harmonize and deal with the complexity and the nuance and tolerate it, instead of it going back to more of like an archaic way of thinking, which is like black or white, right? You're either in or you're out. But I feel like as we are evolving, hopefully as a society, we can tolerate that discomfort of things not always fitting. And so that's why I feel like we are so needed, like and that's why it makes me sad too, because it, in a global way, like this is a microcosm, you know, the way the LDS Church is dealing with this, to a bigger issue of just, are we tolerating more complexity? Are we able to handle you know, like the nuance, and it works this way, but it's also the downside is over here, like, or are we kind of going back to more rigid ways of thinking, black and white?
Right.
And so
Right. Well, let me leave us with this, because maybe this is a positive to leave us on. They wouldn't have gone after me if I wasn't being effective. And in a sense, what I'm being effective about is sexual health. And that's not just my story, that's all of you, right? That's all of our colleagues. That's what a lot of the tension we're seeing in the United States, even with all these kind of political fights about transgender rights and gay rights and, you know, feminism and Me Too movement, right? Like we're kind of in a space, not just in conservative religion, but as a country as a whole, where sexual health is starting to become more effective. What are your thoughts about that?
Oh, I hope so.
Definitely a positive note that I would like to stay, keep with me the rest of the day. That there's a purpose to the madness, that it's because there is change being affected that has been so beyond long overdue. And that's gonna rock the house a bit,
Mhm.
I think there's usually a backfire effect, right, to progress. We know that historically. So some of us have to pay that price. I'm paying a backfire effect price. But hopefully that's tuning us, it's signaling us that we're headed in a more progressive sexual health direction. That's my hope anyway.
Yeah, I think we see the victories every day in our office when people are reclaiming their sexuality after years of abuse, or finding sexual pleasure after believing their whole life that they weren't worthy, or they couldn't experience it, or they didn't think they needed it or wanted it. And or couples that learn to like open up the way that they look at their sexual relationship, and it becomes like a win-win and collaborative instead of, yeah, it's like super exciting when people, you see your clients make these victories and they're genuinely like happy, or they no longer feel ashamed, and they're no longer like, they aren't compulsive anymore because they have healed something deep within them that was feeding that compulsivity in the beginning. So like it's really exciting. Yeah. It keeps me going.
Yeah, so maybe we can see the sex communication of Natasha Helfer as a positive in the the timeline of humanity. One little blip in the timeline of humanity. I really appreciate you all being here. I don't know, Anne, I wanted to leave some time for questions if there was.
Well, there are no questions on the question and answer section in the Whova
Oh,
app,
okay.
but
Okay.
I have a question for
Oh,
you
perfect.
guys. Is that all right?
Yes.
So actually I have 3 written down, but I'll start with the one I'm most curious about. How do you view the law of chastity as the LDS Church has taught it? And how do you help others to work through their feelings of anxiety and shame from maybe not believing it the same exact way as the LDS Church has presented it?
I love that. Is it okay if I go first? All right. So, and I just did a whole thing for Stephanie on treating conservative clients in sex therapy. So I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about what I talk in that class. So I think that there are 2 ways that we can interpret religious dogma. And we even have this language in Mormonism, right? Is it the letter of the law, or is it the spirit of the law? And in more social science circles, they call that act-centric, act behavior-centric models versus relational-centric models. So if I'm going to put my Mormon hat on for a minute, so just bear with me, my Mormon language. If I'm going to believe in Heavenly Parents who created me, just like I've created my own children, I think there's a lot of beautiful kind of symbology there. What would I want for my children? I'd want sexual health. I'd want sexual pleasure. I'd want sexual responsibility. I'd want sexual, happiness that helps them, thrive in life. And if there are sexual mishaps, I'd want a way for that to be resolved and not ruin their lives, and not be such a big deal that they're going to be stuck in some kind of shame cycle or anxiety cycle about that. So for me, the law of chastity, if you get away from like this whole, like, don't masturbate, don't have sex before you're married, don't have, it's like this do list or don't list, that list doesn't protect us, because you still have a lot of problems even in marital sexuality, including abusive problems. So even if you follow all the rules, you're not going to get to sexual health necessarily. And so I see the law of chastity as much more expansive, and I see it as a principle. And this is where I rely a lot on Doug Braun Harvey's 6 sexual health principles, which I think most of us would definitely agree with. So that for me is the law of chastity.
Thank you. Hey, I refreshed my screen and there's 3 questions. So
perfect.
let's
Okay.
start with those. Do you view speaking out on blogs or social media as potentially providing a form of professional help to the many people who can't go to therapists or aren't in a place where they feel ready to do it?
Kristin, you want to take that one since you're all into the media stuff?
Well, I absolutely, I think it's a new wave of advocacy that's accessible to everyone, you know. And so I think that there's some really important work that is able to be done through the public media forums, through sex education in the media, specifically all types of media. And there is a downside to all of it. And many, like, these things are layered and complicated, and you can but all day long talking about the influence of media in our life. But I absolutely think the accessibility that blog posts, social media posts provide in an accessibility for those who otherwise wouldn't be able to access such information.
I want to say something about that, which is it's so important for us to have highly trained therapists like ourselves to give the public accurate information that isn't just based on opinion. We all have opinions about what's okay and what's not okay, but we want to know what research tells us about human sexual behavior and who we are sexually. So.
And I have seen my podcast as that. To me, that's like my calling, since they wouldn't give me a calling. So it's my calling as far as offering, because I do think education is usually where we start in therapy. And if we can make that more accessible to people who can't access mental health services for whatever reasons, it is a good starting point, and then oftentimes can lead to more intensive work. Mm-hmm.
Those are great answers. Okay, we've got 3 minutes and 2 more questions. So the first question of the next part is, have you learned anything about what triggered your excommunication at this particular time? It seems like you've been public for years with views on things like masturbation and gay marriage. Do you know why they decided to do it now?
I don't. I have no idea. Nobody has communicated with me anything. That was a simple answer.
Yes. The next one, do standards regarding therapist-patient confidence extend to patients disclosing details of their counseling to their clergy?
Paige, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I know where I did my internship and I was first a therapist, there was an agreement that if bishops were going to pay, then clients would sign a release of information so that the therapist could touch base with the bishop once a month. Some therapists would share a lot and answer questions, some wouldn't. That was a really sticking point for me in working there. It was hard because I felt like they had to sign it, because otherwise they wouldn't have the ability to get mental health services. So now, as like in my private practice, I don't do that at all, because yeah, I just find that it's counterproductive and it can cause harm. And I will say, though, while I worked there and I was able to talk to some bishops, it was helpful because I was able to educate them and have a collaborative relationship in a lot of cases. And they learned, and I think it affected, I mean, I had a few bishops tell me, oh, and like share how they are changing, how they were working with their members of their ward. So yeah, so.
Well, I want to say very clearly, just so that everybody knows their rights, the law is that it is confidential. A mental health professional never has the right to share anything with anybody that you have not signed a release of information for. Now, what Paige is describing, I believe, is fairly coercive. that we're only going to pay if you sign this release. I did work for LDS Family Services for the first few years of my career, and I would always explain that you do not have to sign this. Most people chose to sign it, but I never presented it as, you know, if you don't sign it, then I can't see you or I won't get paid. So there, it kind of depends on the agency, on the church, you know, how LDS Family Services is functioning with wherever you are geographically, and how the therapists themselves are managing that. But what you just shared with me, Paige, is very concerning because I feel like that's coercive.
Yeah.
And why I did things like start the Mormon Mental Health Association, because of stories like that, because there's way too much unethical practice within our Mormon community when it comes to these things that kind of loophole the legal and ethical guidelines that we have in place as clinicians. So I guess that's probably a good place to end. Goodness.
That's a great place to end. Well, thank you very much, panelists, for being here with us this day. Our time is up, but I'm also grateful for the questions and the attendees who are there, and I've certainly learned a lot, so I appreciate it. And thank you all for supporting Sunstone.